Prince Kale pressed his silver scales against the cold marble floor of the throne room, trying to make himself as small as possible, while his father's voice boomed above him like thunder from an angry storm cloud. The other dragons in the court whispered behind their claws, and every whisper felt like tiny knives cutting into his already wounded pride. Emperor Varos had ruled the Draconic Empire for over 2,000 years, and in all that time, no dragon prince had ever been such a complete disappointment. His golden scales caught the light from the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead, each one perfect and gleaming like tiny suns. His wings stretched wide enough to cast shadows over entire cities, and when he breathed, plasma hot enough to melt steel poured from his mighty jaws. Kyle looked nothing like his father or his brothers and sisters. Where they had magnificent golden scales that marked them as true royalty, his were an embarrassing silver color that made the court nobles snicker whenever they saw him. His wings were barely large enough to lift his body off the ground for more than a few minutes, and instead of the devastating plasma breath that made dragons feared across the galaxy, all he could produce were weak little sparks that wouldn't even light a candle. 3 centuries, Emperor Varos growled, his massive head swinging down to stare at his youngest son. 300 years you have lived in my palace, eating my food, wearing my colors, carrying my name, and what have you accomplished? Nothing. Your brother Darius conquered the Centauri system before his 2nd century. Your sister Lyra discovered 3 new hyperspace routes that brought billions in trade revenue to our empire. Your other siblings command battle fleets, govern star systems, and bring glory to the family name. What do you bring me, Kale? What honor have you added to our bloodline? The young prince's voice came out as barely a whisper. I have tried, father. I study the ancient texts. I practice combat formations. I attempt to... You attempt. The emperor's roar shook dust from the ceiling. Attempting is not achieving. The galaxy does not care about your efforts, boy. It only respects results, and your results are nothing but failure after pathetic failure. General Wraith, the Emperor's oldest and most trusted advisor, stepped forward from where he had been standing near the throne. His scales were deep red with age, and battle scars crisscrossed his hide like a map of every war the Empire had ever fought. My lord, Emperor, if I may suggest a solution to this problem. Speak, Varos commanded without taking his burning gaze off his cowering son. Perhaps Prince Kale would benefit from seeing how real work is done by those who must earn their place in the universe, rather than inherit it. Send him to one of our outer rim stations, somewhere he can observe beings who must struggle for every achievement. Let him witness what true productivity looks like when survival depends on it. The Emperor's eyes lit up with interest. Yes, an excellent idea. Where would you suggest? Station Gamma 7 in the Terran sector, my lord. The humans there run mining operations with remarkable efficiency, despite their primitive technology. They extract more resources from those asteroid fields than species with far superior equipment. The experience might inspire the prince to develop some appreciation for actual accomplishment. Other court members began nodding their heads in agreement. A few even smiled at the idea of the embarrassing prince being sent away, where his failures couldn't reflect poorly on the rest of them anymore. Duke Torex, whose own sons commanded respect throughout the empire, spoke up from his position near the wall. A brilliant suggestion, General. Perhaps manual labor among the lesser species will teach him the value that he has never learned despite all his privileges. Or perhaps, added Duchess, Vera with a cruel smile, he will finally understand why some dragons are meant to rule while others are meant to serve. Prince Kale felt his heart sinking deeper with every word. They were all so eager to see him gone, so happy to have an excuse to remove the family embarrassment. From their sight he had always known he was different, but hearing it discussed so openly made the pain feel fresh and sharp all over again. Emperor Varos stood to his full impressive height, his golden scales rippling with authority. It is decided Prince Kale will be transported to Station Gamma 7 immediately. He will remain there until he either learns to be useful or proves once and for all that he is beyond redemption. Guards, prepare. A transport vessel, nothing fancy. A simple cargo ship will suffice for this mission. Father, please. Kyle tried one last time to speak, but the Emperor cut him off with a dismissive wave of his massive claw. "You will address me as Emperor or your Imperial Majesty until you have earned the right to claim family connection through actual achievement. Now go pack whatever personal items you need. But remember, you are being sent to work, not to vacation. Make yourself useful for once in your miserable existence, or do not bother returning to darken my palace again." As the guards moved forward to escort him out, Kyle caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished marble floor. His silver scales looked dull and lifeless, like metal that had been left out in the rain too long. His small wings were folded tight against his back and his head hung low in defeat. He looked exactly like what everyone said he was. A failure, a disappointment, a prince who would never be worthy of his title. The journey to Station Gamma 7 took several days in hyperspace, and Kale spent most of it staring out the small porthole in his cargo bay quarters. The stars streaked past in long white lines, each one representing another light year between him and everything he had ever known. The transport crew treated him with the bare minimum of respect his title demanded, but he could see the pity in their eyes. They had heard the stories about the worthless prince, and now they were witnessing his exile firsthand when they finally arrived at the station. Kale got his first look at what would be his new home station Gamma 7 was nothing like the crystal spires and golden towers of the Imperial Palace. It was a rough collection of metal modules bolted together around a central hub, floating in space, near a cluster of asteroid mines. The whole structure looked like it had been built from spare parts and held together with determination, rather than proper engineering. The docking bay smelled of machine oil and human sweat. Completely different from the perfumed air of the palace, cargo haulers moved containers of raw minerals, while miners in dirty work suits shouted instructions to each other in the harsh, practical language of people who had real jobs to do. Nobody stopped to bow or show any special deference to the Dragon Prince who had just arrived. They were all too busy with actual workstation Commander Phillips. A weathered human woman with gray hair and tired eyes met him at the transport ramp. She looked him up and down without any particular interest, like she was evaluating a new piece of equipment rather than meeting royalty. "You must be the Dragon Prince we were told to expect," she said in a voice that suggested she had dealt with plenty of difficult situations before. "I'm Commander Phillips, and I run this station. We've got a maintenance bay in Section C where you can set up quarters. It's not fancy, but it's private, and has everything you need to survive. Don't expect special treatment because of your title. Everyone here works for their place, and that includes you." As she led him through the corridors toward his new quarters, Kale saw humans and a few other alien species going about their business with focused efficiency. These weren't the pampered nobles of his father's court. These were beings who had to prove their worth every single day through their actions rather than their bloodlines. For the first time in his life, Prince Kale found himself in a place where nobody cared about his royal heritage or his family name. All that mattered here was what he could actually do. And right now, he had no idea what that might be. The maintenance bay that Commander Phillips had assigned to Prince Kale was roughly the size of a small closet back at the palace, with gray metal walls and a single bunk that was clearly designed for someone much smaller than a dragon. He had to curl up like a house cat just to fit inside, and every time he moved, his wings bumped against the walls or ceiling. The whole space smelled of industrial cleaner and recycled air, nothing like the sweet incense and fresh flowers that always filled his rooms back home for the first week. Kyle barely left his cramped quarters except to visit the station's dining hall for his daily ration pack meals. The food was nutritious but bland, designed to fuel working bodies rather than please royal palates. He spent most of his time lying on the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and wondering if his father had been right all along. Maybe he really was worthless. Maybe Exile was exactly what he deserved. The other station residents mostly ignored him, which was actually worse than being openly mocked. At least back at court, the nobles paid attention to him, even if it was just to laugh at his failures. Here he was simply invisible, another being taking up space but not contributing anything meaningful to the community. It was during his second week that Kale discovered the commercial district, a collection of small shops and services clustered around the station's main hub. Most of the businesses were practical places: a general store, an electronics repair shop, a small medical clinic, and tucked away in a corner near the recycling center, a tiny barber shop with a hand-painted sign that read, Murphy's Cuts and Shaves through the shop's single window. Cale could see a middle-aged human man with graying hair and strong hands, carefully trimming the hair of a young human worker. The barber moved with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of practice, and there was something peaceful about the scene that drew the lonely prince closer. Ben Murphy had been cutting hair on Station Gamma 7 for almost 5 years now. Ever since he retired from his long career in the Earth Colonial Marines, he had seen action on dozens of worlds, fought in 3 major wars, and earned enough medals and commendations to cover his entire chest. But what he was most proud of was his little barber shop, where he could help people look and feel their best without anyone getting shot at in the process. When he looked up from his current customer and saw the silver dragon pressed against his window for the 3rd day in a row, Ben decided it was time to do something about it. The poor creature looked like someone had stolen his last credit and told him his mother didn't love him. Jimmy, you're all set, Ben told the young miner, brushing loose hair from his shoulders. That'll be 5 credits, and tell your wife I said hello. As soon as Jimmy left, Ben stepped outside and called to the dragon, who was already starting to shuffle away down the corridor. Hey there, big fellow, hold up a minute. Kyle stopped and turned around, surprised that anyone would want to talk to him. Are you addressing me? Well, you're the only 7-foot-tall silver dragon I see around here, so yeah, I'm talking to you. Ben leaned against his door frame and studied the prince with the same careful attention he might give to a particularly challenging haircut. Name's Ben Murphy. I run the barbershop here, and I've been watching you wander past my place looking like someone ran over your favorite pet. You want to tell me what's eating at you? I do not understand, Cale said carefully. What is it that you want? From me? Don't want anything from you, son. Just wondering if you might want something from me. You look like you haven't had proper grooming in weeks. Those scales of yours are all dull and patchy, and I bet they itch something fierce when they're not properly maintained. Cale looked down at himself and realized the human was right. His scales had lost their natural luster, and several patches felt rough and uncomfortable against his hide. Back at the palace, he had teams of servants whose only job was maintaining the royal family's appearance. But here he had been trying to manage everything himself with very little success. I am Prince Cale of the Draconic Empire, he said, not really sure why he felt the need to introduce himself properly. I have been sent here as punishment for my failures. Prince, huh? Ben scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, your highness, royalty or not, everybody deserves to feel good about how they look. Come on inside and let me show you what I can do. First session's free, and I promise you'll feel better afterward. You would do this for me without payment? Cale asked, still struggling to understand the human's motivations. What do you gain from this transaction? Sometimes the reward is just seeing someone smile again, Ben replied, holding his shop door open. Besides, I've never worked on dragon scales before. It'll be a fun challenge for an old barber like me. The inside of Murphy's barber shop was small but welcoming, with 2 old-fashioned barber chairs that Ben had modified over the years to accommodate different alien anatomies. The walls were covered with pictures from his military days mixed with certificates and thank you notes from satisfied customers. Soft music played from an ancient audio system, and everything was clean and organized with the precision of a man who took pride in his work. Now then, Ben said, gesturing toward the larger of the 2 chairs. Let's see what we're working with here. You just relax and let old Ben take care of everything. As Cale settled himself into the chair, Ben began examining his scales with the focused attention of a professional. He pulled out various tools from drawers and cabinets, some standard barber equipment, and others that he had clearly modified or built himself for working with non-human customers. See, the thing about scales, Ben explained as he began working with a soft brush and some kind of specialized oil, is that they're like armor. They're meant to protect you, but if you don't maintain them properly, they become a burden instead of a blessing. Each scale needs individual attention, just like each person needs individual care. The oil Ben was using had a pleasant, clean scent that reminded Cale of the mineral springs near the palace, and as the human worked, the prince began to feel more relaxed than he had in weeks. Ben's hands were gentle but skilled, working out rough patches and restoring the natural flexibility and shine that healthy scales should have. You know, Ben continued as he worked, I've seen a lot of soldiers in my time. Some were born fighters, natural warriors who could handle anything you threw at them. Others took longer to find their strength, but when they did, they were often the most reliable ones in a crisis. Being different doesn't mean being worthless. It just means you haven't found the right place to shine yet. My father believes I am a complete failure, Cale found himself saying, surprised by his own willingness to share such personal information with a stranger. My siblings excel at everything expected of dragon royalty, while I cannot even master the most basic abilities of our kind. Your father sounds like he's got his head stuck in some pretty narrow thinking, Ben replied bluntly, continuing to work on a particularly stubborn patch of scales near Cale's shoulder. Silver scales, you said? I've got to tell you, son. I've seen a lot of different beings in my time, but I've never seen anything as beautiful as those scales of yours. When they're properly cared for, gold might be traditional for royalty. But silver is rare. Silver is special. As Ben continued working, something strange began to happen. Cale started to feel different, not just physically, but emotionally. The careful attention and genuine kindness from this human stranger was something he had never experienced before at court. People served him because they had to, and they showed him respect only because of his title. But Ben was helping him simply because he wanted to, because he saw someone who needed care and decided to provide it. There, Ben said finally, stepping back to admire his work. Take a look at yourself now. Cale turned toward the mirror Ben had positioned near the chair, and what he saw took his breath away. His scales gleamed like polished silver, each one catching and reflecting the shop's lights. In tiny sparkles of brilliance, he looked healthy and vibrant in a way he hadn't seen in years. The dull, patchy dragon who had walked into the shop was gone, replaced by someone who actually looked like he might be worth something. I look different, Kyle whispered, hardly believing what he was seeing. You look like yourself, Ben corrected gently. Sometimes all we need is for someone else to help us see what was always there. You're going to be just fine, Prince Cale. I've got a feeling about these things. Over the following weeks, Prince Cale found himself returning to Ben Murphy's barbershop again and again, not just for the grooming services, but for the conversations that came with them. Ben had a way of listening that Cale had never encountered before, not the careful, calculated attention of court nobles who were always looking for advantage or weakness, but genuine interest in what another being had to say. Tell me about your home, Ben said one afternoon as he worked on conditioning the scales along Cale's neck. What's it like being a prince in a dragon empire? Cale thought about the crystal spires reaching toward multiple suns, the vast throne rooms where his father held court, the endless ceremonies and traditions that governed every aspect of royal life. Beautiful, he said finally, but also lonely. Everything is about duty and expectation and proving yourself worthy of the family name. There is no room for being different or for finding your own path. Sounds exhausting, Ben observed, applying a special polish that made Cale's silver scales shimmer like starlight. No wonder you looked so worn down when you first got here. A person can't spend their whole life trying to be someone else without eventually forgetting who they really are. As Ben worked, he shared stories from his own life, tales of distant worlds where he had served, the friends he had made and lost during his military career, the simple pleasures he had discovered in civilian life like the satisfaction of a perfectly executed haircut or the pride of helping someone feel confident about their appearance. I had this sergeant once, Ben said, working carefully around a patch of scales that were still healing from an old injury. Toughest woman I ever met, could outfight men twice her size and outthink officers with fancy educations. But she had this one quirk. She was terrified. Of spiders, absolutely terrified. Even the tiniest little spider would send her running. Now, a lot of people would have made fun of her for that, called her weak or unfit for duty. But you know what I learned watching her? Everyone's got something they're afraid of, and everyone's got something they're better at than anyone else. Her thing was strategy. She could look at a battlefield and see patterns that nobody else noticed, find solutions that saved hundreds of them, Lives the spider thing didn't make her weak. It just made her human. Kale absorbed these stories like a plant soaking up sunlight after a long drought. In all his years at the palace, no one had ever spoken to him like this, sharing personal experiences and treating him like an equal, rather than a disappointment or a duty. Ben's casual wisdom and genuine caring were completely foreign concepts to the young prince, but he found himself hungry for more. During his 4th week on the station, something unexpected happened. Ben was showing Kale how to maintain his own scales between professional sessions when the barbershop's ventilation system suddenly shut down with a grinding noise and the smell of burning electronics. "Well, that's not good," Ben muttered, looking up at the ceiling where wisps of smoke were beginning to seep through the air vents. "Looks like we've got a problem with the environmental controls." Within minutes, the temperature in the small shop began to rise uncomfortably. Ben tried calling maintenance, but they were already dealing with similar problems throughout the station. The malfunction was affecting multiple systems, and repair crews were stretched thin trying to keep critical areas functioning. "This is dangerous," Ben said, wiping sweat from his forehead as the temperature continued climbing. "If the cooling systems fail completely, we could be looking at serious heat damage to sensitive equipment throughout this section." Kale watched Ben struggle with the rising heat and felt something stir inside him. Not panic or helplessness, but a strange sense of possibility. "Ben," he said slowly. "What? If there was a way to cool the air without waiting for the repair crews? What do you mean?" Instead of answering with words, Kale took a deep breath and exhaled very gently. A soft, cool mist flowed from his jaws, nothing like the devastating plasma breath that proper dragons were supposed to produce, but effective in its own way. The temperature in the shop immediately began to drop back toward comfortable levels. Ben stared at him in amazement. "Well, I'll be damned. That's not weak breath, son. That's precision breath. You've got better control than any dragon I've ever heard of." Over the next hour, as they waited for the maintenance crews to fix the ventilation system, Kale continued providing cooling relief for the shop. Ben watched with growing fascination as the prince demonstrated fine control over temperature and humidity, adjusting his breath to maintain perfect comfort levels. "You know what?" Ben said, as they waited. "I bet there are a lot of places on this station where that kind of precise climate control would be incredibly useful. Ever think about offering your services to the engineering crews?" The idea had never occurred to Kale at home. His gentle breath had been seen as a failure, a weakness that marked him as unfit for battle or intimidation. But here on Station Gamma 7, where practical solutions mattered more than traditional expectations, his unique abilities suddenly seemed valuable. The next day, Ben introduced Kale to Chief Engineer Rodriguez, a small, energetic woman who managed the station's technical operations. When Ben explained what Kale could do, Rodriguez's eyes lit up. "With interest, precise temperature control?" she asked. "Like you can adjust heat and cooling to exact specifications?" Kale demonstrated by breathing a gentle stream of perfectly controlled air that Rodriguez could feel change temperature as he adjusted his technique. Her excitement was infectious. "Do you have any idea how useful that could be?" she said. "We've got sensitive electronics throughout this station that require very specific environmental conditions. Usually, we have to use bulky, expensive equipment to maintain those conditions. But if you could provide targeted climate control within days..." Kale found himself busier than he had ever been in his life. Engineer Rodriguez introduced him to problems throughout the station where his abilities could make a real difference. Delicate sensor arrays that needed precise cooling, manufacturing, processes that required exact temperature control, even medical equipment that functioned better under specific environmental conditions. For the first time in his 3 centuries of life, Prince Kale was not just useful, he was in demand. Beings throughout the station began seeking him out for help with problems that his unique abilities could solve. He discovered that his smaller size allowed him to access cramped spaces where larger dragons couldn't fit, and his silver scales turned out to have natural resistance to radiation that made him invaluable for certain maintenance tasks. "You're a natural problem solver," Engineer Rodriguez told him after he successfully repaired a malfunctioning atmospheric processor in the station's central hub. "Most people look at a challenge and see obstacles. You look at the same challenge and see opportunities to use your abilities in creative ways. Ben watched this transformation with quiet pride, seeing the confidence grow in Cale's posture and hearing the enthusiasm return to his voice. The dejected, defeated dragon who had first wandered past his barbershop was disappearing, replaced by someone who was discovering his own worth for the first time. I never thought of myself as useful before, Cale confided to Ben during one of their regular grooming sessions. At home, I was always comparing myself to my siblings, trying to be something I wasn't here. I'm learning to be something I am. That's the secret, Ben replied, carefully polishing scales that now gleamed with health and pride. Everybody's got something special about them, but sometimes it takes the right environment to bring it out. You were never the problem, son. The problem was that nobody ever bothered to figure out what you were good at. Word of Cale's contributions began to spread beyond Station Gamma 7. Other mining operations in the sector started requesting his consultation services, and trade representatives began mentioning the Silver Phoenix in their reports back to various corporate headquarters. The prince, who had been exiled as a worthless failure, was becoming known throughout the region as an innovative problem solver, whose unique abilities could improve operations in ways nobody had previously imagined. But perhaps more importantly than his growing reputation, Kyle was discovering something he had never experienced before: genuine friendship. Ben Murphy had become more than just a barber or even a mentor. He was the first being who had ever looked at Cale and seen potential instead of disappointment, who had offered kindness without expecting anything in return, who had helped him understand that worth came not from meeting other people's expectations but from being true to yourself. The Silver Dragon who had arrived at Station Gamma 7 in shame and defeat was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood what it meant to be valued for who he truly was rather than condemned for who he could never become. The first reports reached the Imperial Palace through routine trade communications, buried among shipping manifests and mining efficiency statistics that normally received little attention from the royal court. A junior clerk in the Ministry of Colonial Affairs noticed an unusual pattern in the productivity reports from the Terran sector, specifically from Station Gamma 7, where the worthless prince had been sent into exile. Mining output had increased by 37% over the past 2 months, with significant improvements in equipment reliability and operational efficiency. The reports mentioned a consulting specialist referred to only as the Silver Phoenix, who had revolutionized several key processes through innovative applications of precision environmental control and small space engineering solutions. The clerk might have dismissed these reports as clerical errors or exaggerated claims, except for one detail that caught his attention. 3 separate mining corporations had submitted formal requests to the Imperial Trade Commission, asking specifically for access to the Silver Phoenix for their own operations. Each request included offers of substantial compensation and long-term contracts. When General Wraith reviewed the reports during his weekly briefing with Emperor Varos, he initially assumed there had been some mistake in the documentation. "My Lord Emperor, there appears to be an anomaly in the reports from the Terran sector. The station where Prince Cale was sent shows remarkable improvements in productivity, and there are references to some kind of technical specialist who has been helping with their operations. What does this have to do with my worthless son?" Emperor Varos asked dismissively, not bothering to look up from the star charts he was reviewing for the next military campaign. "Well, my lord, the timing is unusual. These improvements began shortly after the prince arrived at the station, and the description of this specialist's abilities seems to match certain characteristics that Prince Cale possesses." That got the Emperor's attention. He lifted his massive golden head and fixed General Wraith with a stare that had withered stronger beings than the old soldier. "Are you suggesting that my failure of a son has somehow made himself useful to a mining station?" "The reports are quite specific, my lord. They describe precision temperature control, access to confined spaces, and radiation-resistant capabilities. All of these match Prince Cale's known attributes, though they frame them as valuable assets, rather than deficiencies." Emperor Varos was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected information. His son had been sent away in disgrace, expected to either learn humility through exposure to real work or to fade into obscurity, where his failures could no longer embarrass the royal family. The idea that Kale might have actually succeeded at something was almost incomprehensible. Show me these reports, the Emperor commanded. Over the next several days, General Wraith compiled every piece of information available about Station Gamma 7's recent improvements. The data painted a picture that was hard to dismiss. Mining efficiency, up 37%. Equipment downtime reduced by half. 3 major technical innovations that were already being studied for implementation at other facilities, and consistent praise for the consulting work of someone called the Silver Phoenix. More importantly, when General Wraith discreetly contacted Commander Phillips at the station, she confirmed that Prince Kale was indeed the specialist mentioned in the reports. She spoke of him with genuine respect, describing his contributions as invaluable and his attitude as professional and dedicated. He's nothing like what I expected. From the stories we heard, Commander Phillips reported, the prince is hardworking, innovative, and popular with the crew. He's solved problems that had been plaguing us for years, and he never acts like the work is beneath him. Everyone here calls him the Silver Phoenix because of how he seems to bring new life to everything he touches. Emperor Varos found himself in the unprecedented position of being curious about his youngest son, rather than disappointed for 3 centuries. Every report about Kale had been a litany of failures and missed expectations. Now suddenly he was hearing praise and success stories that seemed impossible to reconcile with the dragon he had exiled. I want to see this for myself, the Emperor announced to his court during the next formal session. Prepare my personal fleet. We will conduct an official inspection of Station Gamma 7. The announcement created a stir throughout the palace. Emperors did not typically visit remote mining stations, and certainly not to check on exiled family members. Several court nobles expressed confusion about why such a journey would be necessary. While others wondered if this meant Prince Kale was being recalled from his punishment, Duke Torex, whose own sons held important positions in the military, was particularly puzzled. My Lord Emperor, surely these reports are exaggerated. If the prince had truly accomplished something significant, wouldn't we have heard about it through proper channels rather than trade documentation? That is exactly what we are going to determine, Emperor Varos replied with finality that ended all discussion. The Imperial fleet that departed for Station Gamma 7 was impressive even by draconic standards. The Emperor's personal dreadnought, surrounded by an escort of battle cruisers and support vessels. The journey through hyperspace gave Emperor Varos time to think about what he might find at his destination. Part of him expected to discover that the reports had been falsified or misunderstood, that his son was still the same disappointing failure he had always been, but another part of him, a part he was reluctant to acknowledge, hoped that maybe, somehow the exile had accomplished what centuries of palace education had failed to do. When the Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace near Station Gamma 7, Emperor Varos got his first close look at the facility that had supposedly transformed his son. The station was still clearly a rough frontier outpost, built for function rather than beauty, but it showed signs of recent improvements and expansions. The mining operations in the surrounding asteroid field were running with remarkable efficiency, and sensor readings confirmed the productivity figures. From the reports, Commander Phillips met the Imperial party at the main docking bay, accompanied by her senior staff and, to Emperor Varos's surprise, Prince Kale himself. The silver dragon who approached with the welcoming committee bore little resemblance to the defeated, broken creature who had been sent into exile. Kyle's scales gleamed with health and careful maintenance. His posture was confident rather than cowering, and when he spoke, his voice carried authority and self-assurance that the Emperor had never heard before. Most remarkably, he showed appropriate respect without the desperate, fearful submission that had characterized his behavior at court. Father, Kale said with a respectful nod, I did not expect your visit. What brings you to Station Gamma 7? I came to see what you have accomplished here, Emperor Varos replied, studying his son with new eyes. The reports reaching the palace have been surprising. I hope they have been accurate as well, Kale responded. The work here has been rewarding, and I believe I have found ways to contribute meaningfully to the station's operations. Before Emperor Varos could respond, Commander Phillips stepped forward. Your Imperial Majesty, if I may say so, Prince Kale has been one of the most valuable additions to our team in years. His innovative solutions and dedication to excellence have transformed several critical aspects of our operations. We would be honored to show you some of the improvements he has helped implement. The tour that followed was a revelation for Emperor Varos. He watched his son confidently lead a team of human engineers through a complex reactor maintenance procedure, using his precise breath control to manage temperatures in ways that traditional equipment could not match. He observed Kale accessing confined spaces to repair critical systems that would otherwise require expensive equipment shutdowns. He witnessed firsthand the respect and genuine appreciation that the station's crew showed for his son's contributions, but perhaps most surprising was the change in Kale's demeanor. This was not the anxious, desperate to please dragon who had spent centuries failing to meet expectations. This was a confident professional who understood his own capabilities and knew how to apply them effectively. He spoke knowledgeably about technical problems and solutions, collaborated easily with beings from different species, and demonstrated leadership qualities that had never manifested during his time at court. During a break in the tour, Emperor Varos found himself standing in the station's main corridor, watching through a window as Kale worked with a team to calibrate sensitive equipment. His son's movements were sure and purposeful, and the beings working with him clearly trusted his expertise completely. It was then that a gruff human voice spoke from behind him. You must be Kale's father. Emperor Varos turned to find himself face to face with Ben Murphy, a middle-aged human, who showed no particular deference or intimidation at meeting the ruler of a galactic empire. The man's casual confidence was almost shocking to a dragon accustomed to beings who trembled in his presence. I am Emperor Varos, he replied, waiting for the appropriate recognition and respect. Ben Murphy, the human said simply, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. I run the barber shop here, been working with your son since he arrived. Finest young man I've ever had the pleasure to know. Emperor Varos stared at this human who dared to speak so casually about royalty, who offered friendship rather than subservience, and who clearly saw something in Prince Kyle that the imperial court had completely missed. Tell me, the emperor said slowly, what do you see when you look at my son? Ben's answer would change everything. Ben Murphy looked Emperor Varos directly in the eyes without flinching, something that would have been unthinkable in the imperial court. I see a young man who was told his whole life that he wasn't good enough, when the real problem was that nobody ever bothered to figure out what he was actually good at. The emperor's golden scales rippled with surprise at the human's directness. Explain. Your son has abilities that most dragons would envy, but they're not the flashy, obvious kind that get attention in throne rooms, Ben continued, leaning against the corridor wall with the relaxed posture of someone who had faced down much worse than angry royalty. He's got precision control that I've never seen in any being, the kind of steady hands and careful mind that can solve problems. Other folks can't even see he's patient, thoughtful, and genuinely cares about doing good work. Those aren't weaknesses, Your Imperial Majesty. Those are exactly the qualities that make someone truly valuable. Emperor Varos found himself listening with an attention he rarely gave to anyone, let alone a human barber on a frontier mining station. But his breath weapon is weak, his size is small, his scales are the wrong color. Says who? Ben shot back with a slight smile. His breath weapon is so precise he can weld circuitry that would take our best technicians hours to repair. His size lets him get into places where bigger dragons would be helpless. And those silver scales of his? They're naturally radiation resistant in ways that have saved lives on this station. Your son isn't a failed version of his siblings, Emperor. He's a completely different kind of dragon, and once we figured that out, he started shining like the star he was meant to be. Over the next 3 days, Emperor Varos observed his son's work throughout the station, and gradually began to understand what Ben Murphy had been trying to tell him. Prince Kale wasn't a broken golden dragon. He was a perfect silver dragon who had been forced to spend centuries trying to be something he was never meant to be. The turning point came when an emergency in the station's main reactor threatened to shut down life support for several sections. Kale led a team into the reactor core, using his radiation resistance and precise temperature control to repair critical components, while larger dragons would have been forced to wait for remote equipment. The grateful faces of the beings whose lives he had helped save told Emperor Varos everything he needed to know about his son's true worth. On the final evening of his visit, Emperor Varos requested a private meeting with both Prince Kale and Ben Murphy in the barber shop, where his son's transformation had begun. The small space felt almost absurdly intimate for such a momentous conversation, but somehow it seemed appropriate. "I have made an error," Emperor Varos said, the words coming with difficulty for a being who had rarely admitted mistakes in 2 millennia of rule. "I have spent centuries trying to force you to be something you were never meant to be. And in doing so, I nearly destroyed something remarkable." Prince Kale looked at his father with surprise and cautious hope. "Father, Let me finish," the Emperor continued. "I am creating a new position within the imperial government, Minister of Innovation and Special Solutions. You will have authority to travel throughout the empire, identifying problems that require unconventional thinking and unique abilities. You will have your own budget, your own staff, and complete autonomy to develop whatever solutions you deem appropriate." The offer was more than Kale had ever dared to dream, but he found himself hesitating. "Father, I appreciate this opportunity, but I have made commitments here. People are counting on me." Ben Murphy spoke up from where he had been quietly listening. "Son, you don't have to choose between helping people here and helping people throughout the empire. This station will always be here when you need a place to come home to, and will always be proud to have played a part in helping you find yourself." Emperor Varos nodded approvingly. "The barber speaks wisdom. Additionally, I am extending an invitation to Mr. Murphy to visit the Imperial Palace. As an honored guest, I believe the Empire could benefit greatly from his insights into recognizing and developing potential in unconventional forms." Ben chuckled. "Well, I suppose I could use a vacation from cutting hair. Maybe I can teach some of your fancy court folks how to see past their own expectations." 6 months later, the Draconic Empire had begun implementing what historians would later call the Silver Reform's educational systems, were restructured to identify and nurture different types of abilities, rather than forcing all students into identical molds. Military training programs developed specialized tracks for dragons with unique capabilities, rather than washing out those who didn't fit traditional combat roles. Economic policies began encouraging innovation and creative problem-solving rather than just rewarding conventional success. Prince Kale's silver scales became a symbol throughout the empire, representing the idea that true strength often came in unexpected forms. Young dragons who had previously felt inadequate began to discover their own unique talents with the help of new support systems modeled on the approach Ben Murphy had pioneered. Ben himself spent several months at the Imperial Palace, establishing training programs for educators and counselors throughout the empire. His simple philosophy of helping beings discover their own worth, rather than forcing them to meet arbitrary standards, revolutionized how the Draconic society approached individual development. The barbershop on Station Gamma 7 became something of a pilgrimage site for beings from across the galaxy who had heard the story of the human who helped a dragon prince discover his true nature. Ben eventually opened a second location on the Imperial homeworld, though he always maintained that his best work happened in the small humble shop where it all began. Years later, when historians studied the transformation of the Draconic Empire from a rigid hierarchy focused on conformity to a dynamic society that celebrated diverse talents, they would point to many factors: changing economic conditions, contact with other species, the natural evolution of any long-lived civilization. But those who had witnessed the events firsthand knew that the real catalyst had been much simpler. Sometimes the most profound changes began with one person, caring enough to see past the surface and recognize the potential that everyone else had missed. Sometimes the difference between failure and success was nothing more than finding the right environment where unique abilities could flourish. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was the simple human capacity to look at another being and say, "You have value exactly as you are." Prince Kale continued to serve as the Empire's Minister of Innovation for many years, solving problems throughout the galaxy and inspiring countless beings to embrace their own unique qualities. But he never forgot the lesson he had learned in a small barbershop from a retired human soldier who taught him that worth wasn't something you earned by meeting other people's expectations. It was something you discovered by being brave enough to be yourself. And whenever his duties brought him back to Station Gamma 7, he would always stop by Murphy's Cuts and Shaves for a maintenance session with the human who had changed his life. The Silver Dragon and the gruff Barber would talk about whatever was troubling the galaxy that week, and Ben would carefully tend to scales that now gleamed with the confidence of a being who had finally found his place in the universe. The Empire that had once valued only strength and conformity learned a new lesson from the most unlikely teacher imaginable. That sometimes the greatest power came not from forcing others to meet your standards, but from helping them exceed their own. And in the quiet moments between appointments, Ben Murphy would smile as he watched beings of all species discover their own worth in the reflection of his barbershop mirror, knowing that every small act of kindness had the potential to change the galaxy.